Has the market changed its mind about what the Fed may do next?
My colleagues and I are strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Christopher Crystal with Finance Stockholm, and these are our thoughts on the market, some of the things to look for, and where we see the trend going. The big weight yesterday was on the Fed and how they were going to react, or what they were going to do for the fifth rate hike in the year. Following in the trend, they make the trend of raising by 75 basis points. This will put a big crimp on the economy. I think the questions now are, is this too much? Should they have gone to 100, or would 100 have been too much in the rate hike cycle to decrease the inflation? Certainly, it's going to be felt by the homeowners. We've already felt it here in Sweden with our own recent cycle hikes. And everybody's coming out now in Sweden from the local banks. They've all raised their rates for the mortgages. You have a lot of explanation about the mortgages and what to do with your amortization. And then there are many people talking about, should you keep a variable rate, or should you lock it in now, or is it too late to lock in your rate? And so we're getting continued discussions there, and many are really afraid of what's happening and how the market is turning, because there really is no bright light yet. And the situation in Russia and Ukraine gets even worse. We had the news yesterday we talked about with Putin drawing up the 300,000 draftees. You had Biden making statements over at the United Nations to discuss the situation in Russia and Ukraine. And then you have Putin also in those comments talking about nuclear war, or the possibility to use nuclear weapons. And then if you remember, we have China and India are still standing beside Russia. And what does that mean, and why would that bother anybody? Well, they're obviously working together on trade and developing or strengthening their relationships. And something very important to remember is, although, yes, you see China and India fighting over the Himalayas, you do also see a weapons alliance, or a strategic alliance in some ways, although not in shared military troops, between India and Russia. And that's occurred since 1987-88, where India started leasing nuclear submarines from Russia. They have returned one, excuse my pronunciation, Chakra II class nuclear submarine. And that was because of what India called maintenance issues, but Russia called exploding air canisters. Either way, it sounds like a bad maintenance issue. But so you have India and China backing Russia, or standing with them. Russia talking about Ukraine and not giving up. Ukraine talking about not giving up. So we're very, very far away from peace talks or any sorts of negotiations. EU is talking about imposing new sanctions against Russia. Believe it or not, none of the sanctions have worked so far. Russian economy is doing relatively well, and you're not seeing the negative effects of being excluded from the SWIFT banking system yet. And nor does it look likely to occur, as they're requiring payments for their gas in their currency. So we'll see what develops there between China, Russia, and India, and currency. And on top of that, you have you do have some protest in Russia concerning the troops reinforcement to Ukraine, and but it's occurred in two regions primarily. We'll see if this spreads and at what level. I think you need to get to something like 2% or 3% before you get any sort of real movement where you have a very vocal minority controlling the majority. But right now, we don't see it. And certainly, I don't think they'll be pulling in the troops to quell the people, because they need those troops in Ukraine. So, but when we think about nuclear and the possible effects of this war, we had comments yesterday in the Svenska Dagbladet talking about our nuclear power here in Sweden. So, and this is on the back of the Uniper nationalization by the German government. So the German government owns 98.5% of Uniper. Uniper operates hydropower plants here in Sweden, and they own two ownership stakes in two of our nuclear reactors. The previous government, the Social Democrats, had been closing reactors. And Germany itself has closed reactors, and even they're down to 2 now, which should generate about 6% of their energy needs for their economy. And they control now stakes in Sweden. And there was a fear that because they now control this, would they try to impede Swedish nuclear power production? And the Moderaterna party, which will be taking the mandate or has the majority mandate, has said no, they're not going to impede it. I think the Swedish citizens will look to see what happens. And certainly that'll be a long-term issue down the road if we do close any of our nuclear instead of build out our nuclear, which was part of our recent election cycle campaigns. And the cost of electricity obviously going to play a factor there. We have to wait and see what the ECB is going to do on price stability and inflation. But something here's a fun little thing where we can look maybe positively, but also somewhat negatively. Is Securitas signaled this morning that they're having increased sales and they're showing organic growth. They're also showing an increased growth because of their acquisition of Stanley Security in the United States. So part of the effect is from the dollar. You do see organic sales growth, and you do see continued growth in America, in the Americas, primarily in the US, and then you see the growth here in Europe as well for the need for security services. They also offer some network security on the internet side and computer side, and you're seeing strong growth over there overall, and they do use the word organic. But what this highlights is a global trend. So as you've had a lot of protests, you've had questioning of previous policies, and you have political turns to this, there is a growing need for security. On one hand, you could argue that this is again another tax on the middle class, because in order to get the services you should be getting from the police, you now have to employ private individuals. And if you want a lesson in how that worked out in the past, look at Pinkerton Securities in the United States and how they acted from the time of the Civil War and onwards through to the coal rebellion of the 1920s. And you can see what can happen with private security services. More recently, people could look at Blackwater, which operated in the United States, or if you want to look at Russia and Wagner Group, which has some very dark backgrounds, that gives you maybe a better example. So the growing security trend, both in the home and commercially and online, is a positive trend. We have a number of those that are trading here on our Scandinavian markets, on lower markets like maybe a First North or some of our NASDAQ market. But overall, here in the Nordics, we're seeing the banks dropping recommendations, lowering, going to sells, including where you see the consumer goods supermarkets are being hit on recommendations for downgrades. So with that, want to wish you a great day, and hope you can look positively at some things, and we'll try to find those for you. So thank you very much and have a good day.